How effective are you at decision making? Do you find it easy to do? Do you find it difficult? What happens when you make a bad decision and you have to correct it? How long does it take? Are you able to balance your ego with the appropriate humility to admit when you've made a bad decision? Are you able to bring people into the decision-making room and get different opinions and solicit different points of view that help you to make decisions? What do you do when balancing instinct and data? All of these are issues that you need to be able to address and understand if you're going to be effective at decision-making. And that's why I'm bringing on today my guest, David Siegel. He is the CEO of Meetup, and Meetup is the world's largest platform for building local communities. He is also the author of Decide and Conquer, 44 Decisions That Make or Break All Leaders. So today's session is a masterclass on decision-making. And that is the one thing that you have to get really good at if you're going to be successful. So you're in the right place if you're a leader and you make decisions. Thanks to David for joining me here today. Feel free to share this episode with other people who you think will benefit from hearing it. Give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thank you very much for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. David, welcome to Construction Genius.
It is so great to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is going to be really awesome. You've been at the C-level in a variety of different companies for 15 plus years, and you've been making decisions on a daily basis that affect the lives of your employees, your customers. Tell us about the worst decision you ever made in business.
Oh, you just want me to look bad right from the start. Is that what it is? The truth is, though, when you talk about your failures and you talk about your mistakes, I actually think people look better than at any other time. And I think one of the best things to do is to ask about the failure and mistakes. So I'm glad we're starting right off with that. So here we go.
Awesome.
So one of my challenges in being an executive, when I became an executive, was that I'm a pretty nice person. I don't like to offend people. I don't like to upset people. I want to make the people around me happier. And that's a good thing because it helps to build relationships with people, and that's a positive. But on the negative end, it can result and has resulted in wimpier decision-making. And decision-making that's kind of shorter term so as not to upset people. So the number one decision that I think about as being a mistake is when I joined Meetup, and Meetup was owned by WeWork. And probably everyone who listens to your podcast, especially in construction, knows all about WeWork.
Yep.
And about the excesses in WeWork. And the mistake that I made was we were losing so much money as a company at Meetup that we ended up having to do a downsizing and pretty quickly. And I was too nice. And we cut, frankly, too few jobs. And the result of that is we ended up having to do another downsizing 9 to 12 months later, where I had to become more aggressive. And I think it comes down to the mistake of trying to be nice and prioritizing that and trying to be liked, shall I say, as a leader, and prioritizing that over truly what was in the best interest of the business. We knew we had to cut. You very rarely will hear a CEO say, we cut too much. Very rarely will hear a CEO say, we cut too much. And I would say that was a huge mistake because even after I did that cut, I said, I don't think this is going to happen again. And that was a terrible thing to say because that was really did happen again.
So let me ask you about that. There's this idea of the shorter term versus the longer term decisions, and specifically around what you're talking about with people decisions that you have to make where people are going to lose their jobs. And obviously that has an emotional toll on the person making the decision as well as the person who's losing their job. In your experience, how do you distinguish between the shorter term consequences and the longer term consequences when you're making a decision?
Okay. So here's what I would say. More often than not, the person who's making a decision has a greater degree of data and information about the impact in the short term than the impact in the long term, right? Because it's short term, just by its very nature. So what happens oftentimes is people actually, I'm going to be a little counterintuitive, prioritize the long term too much. And the problem with that is they don't have enough insight into actually what the long term is going to be. Because in reality, after you make a short term decision, especially if it's an important one, you can pivot, or the environment can pivot and things can change. So I actually think decision makers oftentimes prioritize the long term. They're worried, how will this impact our big brand? How will this impact our reputation? Those things are important. I'm not saying not to think about them, but you got to think about what the needs of the business are right now, and then understand you have that best information right now, and then you can pivot later on as you learn more. It's better to make smaller wins, smaller focus on what you know, than the questions about what could happen in the future.
Interesting. It reminds me of the framework I've often heard from the Amazon folks about how there's level 1 and level 2 decisions. The level 1s are the ones that you can pivot from. The level 2s are the ones that you can't.
Yes. So I like Eric talking about trapdoor decisions and non-trapdoor decisions.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay, a trapdoor decision it's a trapdoor. You can't open it back up. Really hard to do that. But very few decisions are actually trapdoor decisions. In fact, most people don't realize how easy it oftentimes is to take. Let's say you have to let someone go, or let's say you have to hire someone and you're struggling. Should I hire this person, not hire this person? That's not a trapdoor decision. Doesn't work out. You have a conversation and that person can be replaced. What's a trapdoor decision? Even taking a job is not a trapdoor decision. Getting married. You could get divorced, but that's a pretty big one. Having kids, that's a trapdoor decision. There's very few business trapdoor decisions, and almost all decisions can be figured out how to fix them later on. People struggle so much in decision making, and it's just better to make a quick, fast decision than to belabor it and take too long in making it.
Okay, so that's really great. So let's say I'm one of those folks who belabors decisions, is kind of cautious, and struggles to distinguish between the trapdoor and the non-trapdoor. What advice would you have for me to help me to just process through the decisions that I make to make sure that I'm not belaboring stuff and missing out on opportunities?
Okay, first of all, Eric, you don't seem like that kind of person, so I'm sure you're not. You seem like actually a pretty fast decision maker. So, but you'll have to tell us about that later on, perhaps. But let's say you were that type of person. So I would say I tend to use the very simple kind of decision-making framework of urgency and importance. It's really, focus on what's high urgency and what's high important. And too often people focus on things that are important, but they may not be urgent. And if they're not urgent and they're important, you can actually do them a little bit later. If something's urgent and even medium important, it's more important to take action on that than something that may be even higher importance, but less urgent. So I like that kind of framework around that. The other thing I would say is to recognize that not making a decision is in itself a decision.
Right.
And that there are severe negative consequences oftentimes to not making a decision. I can't figure out who to hire, let's say. So what that means is I now have 10 people that are reporting into no one, and they're not getting direction. They're not getting career development because I just can't figure out whether to hire that person or not. And that job is staying open for months and months and months. And that's a decision. You made a really bad decision there. Better to hire someone, coach them, figure it out, and not necessarily let perfect be the enemy of the good. As though that's cliched, too oftentimes people let that happen and they don't understand how easy it is to unwind things.
Okay. So let's go back to this process that you went through where you needed to downsize, you didn't downsize enough, and then you just had to, the pain came one way or another, right? It was the pain was going to happen now or it was going to happen later, but the pain came. What did it teach you about the weakness of being a nice person? And how did you get to the point where you overcame your quote unquote niceness and made that tough decision?
Woo! Okay, I love it. Okay, so first of all, I think it's important to differentiate between being nice and being kind. Let me explain the two.
There you go.
Okay?
Yep.
So being nice is not making someone feel bad. But in reality, sometimes that's not kind.
Yes.
If you're afraid to give feedback to someone because you don't want to make them feel bad, that's not being kind. And the goal is for us to be kind, not being nice. Sometimes firing someone who is not doing a good job is the kindest thing you could absolutely do. May not be nice. Doesn't make you feel good, doesn't make them feel good. So the feeling afterwards is uncomfortable oftentimes by being kind. We're recognizing that it's about being kind, not being nice. And I wasn't being kind to the rest of the employees at Meetup in that we were still losing a significant amount of money because I hadn't cut things enough. I wasn't being kind to our board of directors. I wasn't being kind to myself. And I wasn't being kind to the future financial performance and viability of the business, which is directly affects everyone from a compensation perspective and others. So I think the mental framework that I provided for myself is don't necessarily get overly caught up in care about doing things the right way. Always care about doing things the right way. But if someone feels bad, uncomfortable, there's tension. Tension can be very, very healthy. Tension can be a very good thing. And focus on being kind, not necessarily just being nice.
Yeah, and I think that's a tremendous framework is if you can define to yourself what kindness means, and I think you did a terrific job there, that is the way to overcome your fear of decisions that have a short-term or even a long-term negative impact on someone. So that's tremendous. Now, it's interesting about these trapdoor decisions because in construction, people do not go out of business because they don't have enough work. They go out of business because they take on work that they shouldn't have, and they get themselves contractually committed. And as a result of that, it can ruin their businesses. Many people have experienced that. The reason I ask you this is because in your book, you talk about a number of different fallacies or biases that we struggle with that affect our decision making. And I'd like you to speak to one of them, the sunk cost fallacy. Can you just describe it from your perspective, what you mean by that and why that's a challenge for decision makers?
Okay, I love it. Okay, and first let me say one of my favorite lines in one of my favorite books, Lean Startup, is startups, and I think that's true of construction companies, die more from indigestion than starvation.
There you go.
They take on too much. They have too many different priorities. They're all over the place and they can't focus. And because they can't focus, they don't necessarily then set themselves up to be able to succeed. Yep. So I love what you just said, Eric, and I want to just kind of add that as well. So now let's talk about sunk cost fallacy. So my prime example for me on a personal level of sunk cost fallacy is when I go to an expensive restaurant.
Yes. Dude.
Yes, I go to the restaurant and I get a nice, beautiful plate of steak or whatever it is that I'm getting, and it's steak and potatoes and salad and all this beautiful food. I just spent a bundle of money on this beautiful food, and I'm now stuffed like halfway through.
Yep.
Because I think to myself, "Oh, I spent so much money. I got to finish this up." But of course, that's ridiculous because the goal is to enjoy yourself, right, and maybe to have less of the food. But I can't get past. So what the sunk cost fallacy, for those who don't know, means is the concept that if you purchase something, or it doesn't have to be a purchase, it could be time, it could be money, it could be anything. If you invest any product or service, that is already a decision that's done. It's out there. It's gone. It can't be taken back. I already paid that $100 for that meal. Okay. So the sunk cost is not appreciating the fact that cost is sunk and it can't be changed. But too often we let that cost influence us and end up taking irrational actions like me gorging myself on food that I don't even want to feel sick later on to compensate for the fact that I just spent all this time. So another example would be I started this company. And when I started this company, I put so much time and energy into it. Whoa, I can't shut this company down. I put too much of myself into it. The right way to think about the bias is, wait, no, that time's gone. I lost that time. I need to now understand the fact that whether I decide to continue the company or not continue the company, it's over and done with. I'm not going to let that influence how I'm going to take my actions right now. So that's a little bit about what sunk cost fallacy is. And the first thing in any kind of understanding of a bias, step one, just like if it's AA, step is understanding that you have a problem.
Yes.
And we all have a problem with biases and decision making, and biases around sunk cost. And it's just saying, I have a problem. I need to recognize the fact that I am influenced too heavily by things that are already been done, and how I'll feel about myself potentially afterwards. As like, for example, in the company example, I'm now going to feel like a failure if I shut it down. So I don't want to feel that way. So I'm just going to keep pushing on something that might be impossible, or stay in a job and it's not going to ever end up succeeding, even no matter how long I stay.
Right. So then what advice would you give to someone? Because, in construction, as I know you understand, is people sign contracts. So I've taken on that contract and I know I'm going to lose a boatload of money on it, perhaps. And maybe I don't want to break the contract, but it really is damaging my business. Mm-hmm. How can I get together with my executive team and decide what actually needs to be done at that point?
Right. So the first thing is you signed a contract, which means you are legally obligated to do what you signed a contract. That doesn't necessarily mean that your following the contract is in the best interest of both parties.
Right.
Meaning it could in fact also be the interest of the other side of the contract that you do something, a third alternative approach that is different than the contract. So just because you signed that contract doesn't mean you can't potentially sit down with the other side and say, okay, let's just talk turkey here. Let me talk about what are some of the reasons why you originally signed this contract. Let's evaluate if all those things are still true for both sides. And I want to and ask the other side, because sometimes they don't even want you to do your side of the contract either. And then genuinely say, hey, has enough potentially changed from your perspective that we should reevaluate or rethink about what our relationship looks like? Because I will do whatever I'm obligated to, and I also want to do whatever is going to be in your best interest, but I want to make sure that things are still in your best interest. With COVID's changed a lot.
Right.
So just because two parties signed a contract prior to COVID doesn't necessarily mean that both parties or either party wants the exact same thing to continue. So don't make assumptions about what the other side really wants just because you happen to have signed that contract.
Excellent. I like that. As we've been going through the conversation, we've talked about the difference between being nice and being kind. We've talked about the sunk cost fallacy. I know it takes an incredible amount of energy, determination, and ego to start and build a company, to lead a construction company. And yet, as we think about the ability to make decisions, a word that keeps popping up in my mind is humility. And the reason why is because I've got to be able to acknowledge when I've made a bad decision. I've got to be able to take input from other people in order to make decisions. So how does a leader balance their ego with this idea of humility when it comes to decision making?
Oh, by the way, the best part, the most important part of humility,
there you go,
is listening.
Yes.
And if you don't have humility, your ego, you're not going to listen effectively. Everyone will tell you that the most important part of negotiations is listening. One of the most important parts of management is listening. Most important parts of customer service and service orientation is listening. So my advice that I would give to anyone in construction or not in construction is to realize that your job is to be as effective as possible. And as long as you let ego drive your decision-making, you will be less effective. You will make less money. You will do a worse job. Humility and listening are the key ingredients towards actually doing a better job. And to the extent that you want to do a better job, which every single leader does, it is in your selfish interests to be more humble. So the framework is, it's easy for people to do things that are in their selfish interests. So frame things in your selfish interests and realize that it actually is best for you to be as humble as possible, to be more successful.
Now, it's very interesting because some people, we kind of recoil a little bit at the word humility. We think it means, just allowing people to run over me and stuff like that. But I like the way that you framed humility in terms of listening, because that's an activity that expresses that quality. So as a CEO with I mean, you've been in the room so many times with different people giving you input and having to make a decision. How is it that you ground yourself so that you're a more effective listener?
Ooh, wow. Okay. So first I would say is one of the areas that I desperately aim to improve upon is listening. In fact, I recently had a meeting with our executive team, and this will answer your question. And I had each person go around and state what their New Year's resolution was. Mm-hmm. And then I started, of course, and I said, my New Year's resolution is to give my opinion only after hearing other people's perspectives and not jump in super fast because I'm so energetic and I already have my opinions before other people. And I need to become better at pulling back and sharing my thoughts only after hearing other people. So to answer your question, what's one way you could be better at listening? Just shut your mouth and wait for other people to share their thoughts. And then at the end, oftentimes I'll say, okay, I have 4 things that I want to share. And I kind of write them down and I share them at the end. And oftentimes I don't even have to share them because other people may have said them. And if other people say them, then they've now been brought onto them much more than if I said them. So you could get a lot more value from a management team if it's not just a dictatorial type relationship, but it's more of an empowered management team where everyone feels that they're part of the decision. So it's funny, CEOs make way too many decisions. Leaders make way too many decisions. And actually, we should be making fewer decisions and figuring out the most important decision oftentimes is deciding whether or not you should be making this decision or someone else.
Yeah.
Make the decision.
Yep.
So I think part of that humility and listening is understanding the fact that you will get a better result, you will get better buy-in, and you will be a better leader if you're able to kind of listen more effectively again.
Okay, so I want to go back to this just to dive into this because I know it's a deep challenge for almost every leader I know to listen. And what I heard you doing is in a meeting, are you writing down your ideas as you're in the meeting?
Yes, I literally have a pen and paper, and I'm writing down 1, 2, 3, 4, and because I need my old habits would be to just jump out and say it. So it helps me and I'm afraid I'm going to forget it if I don't say it.
Yes.
Or I'm afraid that the conversation is going to start straying to something that I don't want to go there. Now, sometimes I need to interject, or sometimes it's positive for it to go there. And even if it takes longer, it's actually a better development for people to see both sides. So and the other thing I did, by the way, which you'll appreciate, is I said to my team, I need you all to hold me accountable to be better at this and to call me out if you hear me interjecting too often, too early, too quickly. So I want your help. I'm asking for your help. And when someone does it, I'm going to say to them, thank you so much. You're absolutely right. And then that will help me to be more effective too. So I'm asking for people's help in an area that I need to work on, which is holding back, writing things down, like I said.
I really like that, writing things down, because that's a way for you to get it out of your own head, like you said. And the key to go last as a CEO is so important because, as you so well said, it gives other people the opportunity to share their ideas, which may be yours. And people work harder for their ideas than they do for your ideas every single time.
Every time.
Okay, now I want to continue to explore this idea of CEOs making way too many decisions. So if I am a CEO, I have a sneaky suspicion I'm making way too many decisions. How can I get out of that loop, so to speak?
So the first step is to ask yourself, why? Why am I making all these decisions? Because it starts with that. So the options are why. Either A, you don't trust your people.
Yes.
In which case, the solution is find people you do trust.
Okay.
Right? B, the reason why you're making a decision is because that's your natural inclination.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to delegate, and you need to figure out a path towards becoming a more effective leader. You might have the people, you just have a poor natural inclination. That's the problem.
Yep.
So it could be a myriad of reasons of why, but you got to ask yourself the why. And then once you have the answer, then take action. But the action will really depend on what the why is in the first place for people. There aren't that many reasons why. Usually it's about trust or it's about natural inclinations, or it's about your belief that you know more because of your history than anyone else in the room happens to know.
Yep.
And again, that's ego. That's a problem.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So let's talk about delegation then really quick, because delegation is a decision. What is a framework that you use for delegation that you found to be very effective?
Whew, okay, I actually got one. So my framework is, this is extreme, but it works for me. Delegate every single thing unless you actually believe that you could do better at it than someone else.
Okay.
And oh, by the way, there's very few things that I could do better than most other people because I have a head of marketing on my team. Head of marketing knows a lot more about marketing than I do. I got a head of product, got a head of engineering. All those people know a lot more about their domains of experience than I actually do. So there's very few things that I can do better, or I'm the only person in a position to be able to do. So for example, there's an open role for an executive. I'm the only person that could hire that executive. No one else can hire that executive. Only I could do it. So I am the right person to do it. Or if there's something that's about a cross-functional situation where there's work that's needed between different parties, and my job is to help to make the two parties come together to ideally be aligned around a decision, or sometimes to actually make the decision myself, which is very, very rare, then that's a role that's very, very important for me to play. But I would say literally delegate everything unless you're the only person to do it or the best person to do it.
Okay. What is the biggest mistake? Let's say people want to delegate, but what is the biggest mistake they make when delegating?
Oh, great. Okay, here it is. They talk about the what and they don't talk about the why. They don't give the context of and the background needed to make a smarter decision. So let's say, I want you to sign a contract with, this construction company, as quickly as possible. Sure. Okay, sure. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's terrible. You got to explain. Let me explain the reason why. Let me give the context of why we're doing this. And if you have a better idea of what we should do based on me giving you the background, then please share your thoughts. So what they don't do is they don't give context and they don't ask for people's opinion after giving that context to enable people, to give people permission to be able to say, I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right thing to do. You can override them. And a lot of times you should override them, but you should at least give people the opportunity to be able to disagree, because when there's disagreement, the best decisions get made. You want as much of an environment where you're facilitating disagreement. When you're top down and there's no and you don't give the opportunity for disagreement because you don't give enough information, then that's where problems develop.
Okay, so let's pursue that. So you when you're delegating, you not only have to delegate what's to be done, but why it's to be done, and then give the person the opportunity to disagree or to give you feedback. You say through disagreement, you make the best decisions. You're in a room, you've got a couple of, your alpha players, so to speak. Everybody's got opinions. A couple of different things here. How do you as the CEO balance manage the clash of egos or the clash of opinions, which is perfectly reasonable? And then the next question is, how do you bring out from the shyer people their feedback and make the environment a safe one for them to give their feedback?
Woo! Man, you ask good questions. You should be a podcaster. Okay.
Yeah, right.
So, it's getting to extroverts and introverts.
Okay.
And your question is two parts. The first part is, when you have a whole lot of extroverts and alpha people in the room, what do you do? And the second part of your question is, how do you create the same level playing field for an introvert who might be more thoughtful in their responses and might actually have better advice than extrovert just because they're overly aggressive? Okay, those are the two parts. So part one, on the extrovert side and the alpha example you gave, if you try to do it in the room with the entire group, it could get very messy. Very messy, because there's so much emotion involved and ego involved with so many different people. What I will oftentimes do, I'll say, let's take a pause. Thank you. This was really helpful. Let's take a pause. And then separately, even though, what takes a long time could take a short time, and what takes a short time ends up could take a long time. Meaning, Meaning it could take longer to have one-on-one conversations with the 3 or 4 people that have very strong opinions, but you really need to have those one-on-one conversations. And in each one of them, you need to call people out and say, hey, are you making this recommendation? What is the incentive behind this recommendation? Because too often, when you got a group of people that are strongly opinionated, their incentives may or may not be aligned with what's really in the best interest of the company versus what's in the best interest of their department or themselves. So sitting down one-on-one with these people, helping them understand the context of the other person's perspective will likely then lead you to get back together in the room. And now because you've had those one-on-one conversations with people, it's going to be a lot smoother conversation because they understand the context in the first place. Trying to do that in one big group of very aggressive people, it don't work. It does not work well. It could get messy and ugly and emotional. Now, for your second part of your question, one of the things I love to do is kind of the Amazon way as well, because you referenced Amazon earlier in terms of level 1, level 2 decisions, is documentation prior to decision making. So one of the things that we do at Meetup is, and I try to push it for all my meetings, I try to encourage my executives to do it. We're not perfect at it. We're getting better at it. Which is say, we don't want to enter a meeting unless there's already been someone written something down, someone shared with the group of people what's been written. Everyone has had an opportunity to look at it and read it and add comments. And now we're going to have a conversation where we're putting the aggressive extrovert people on the same level as those more thoughtful introverted people who may be more comfortable writing their comments on a piece of paper than yelling them from the hilltops in the big meeting. And now when we actually have that meeting, we're going through areas where there's disagreement between people in the document. And what I tell people is I say, if you don't read the document and you don't put any single comment in the document, don't show up to the meeting. Because that means that you're not going to be informed of the context and you're not going to be able to then help to make a smarter decision. So documentation really levels the playing field between introverts and extroverts. Again, it takes longer, but it actually takes shorter. And it saves you time later on because you then get more alignment later, quickly.
I like that idea. That's excellent. The idea of documentation. Very good. I appreciate that. So let's just keep going through the process here. So you've delegated, and now as the CEO, to one degree or another, you're going to have to hold someone accountable. Having made that delegation decision, how do you frame the accountability conversations and the rhythm associated with that accountability?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that people make around accountability, I see it happen all the time, is they say, David/Sally, you're both in charge of this. No.
Yep.
The most important thing you could do in accountability, really the most important, is never have a slash. It's one person. Yep. There's one person who's fully accountable. And someone will say to me, when I say to our head of engineering, you're fully accountable. And he'll say, but wait, I need to work with marketing, I need to work with finance, I need to work with all these other people. What about their accountability? No. You're accountable, get the job done. You're accountable to hold them accountable to get each of their specific jobs done. But I'm holding you accountable for the whole thing, so there's no finger pointing. And when you have one single point of contact has been termed as a throat to choke in a negative way or a positive way, one person you could celebrate. When you have that, it changes everything, because when you don't, it gets very, very messy. When people send emails and they're like, I need the 3 of you to get together and talk about this. No. X person, you're in charge of making sure to figure this out. I need you to get the 2 others together to get this done. You need one single point of person, and you need a time frame for every single one of the key decision points and timelines in the process. Too often it's like, oh yeah, I'll get this done in 2 months. No. Especially in construction, you need to know each of the key timelines that lead up to that point. And then you need to have regular meetings, oftentimes once a week, once every other week, whatever it is, to kind of go through the timelines for each of those things, to hold people accountable. And then to understand that if something's off, share it. The worst thing that can happen is surprises. In construction, I am sure the absolute worst thing in the world is surprises. Your job as a decision maker, your job as a leader, is to eliminate surprises.
That's very good.
And when you have accountability, you are accountable to having a no surprise type situation, which means always sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly. Sharing the bad news. If you're afraid to share the bad news, you're going to have surprises later on, because bad stuff happens.
Yep. That's excellent. So let's zoom back out here for a moment. Your book is called Decide and Conquer: 44 Decisions That Make or Break All Leaders. So 44 is a lot. What are the top 3 decisions that you talk about in your book that are the most important for leaders to make?
I'll talk about a couple that we haven't hit on yet. And I will not hit on all 44 because that could take a way too long. But here we go. So the first is, people don't often appreciate the fact that you can actually make decisions that increase the chances of you becoming lucky. People oftentimes say, I got lucky. I got unlucky. Oh, I got unlucky. And there's truth to luck. However, people don't understand that you can make a decision that creates many options for yourself, or you could make a decision that only has one option for yourself. If I decide in the finance world that I want to go into investment banking.
Right.
Well, if I go into investment banking, there's about 100 other jobs. I can become an analyst. I can become a general manager. There's a lot of other jobs that I could decide to do because of all the different options that I created for myself. Or I can make the decision to go into something very, very niche and very, very specialized. And then I have much fewer options available for myself. So one framework that I always like to talk about is, when you make a decision, are you decreasing the number of options available for yourself? Or are you potentially increasing the number of options available for yourself? It doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong, but be extremely confident, cognizant of the optionality factor and how many options you're actually creating for yourself.
Okay, so this reminds me of a classic framework of decision making or expertise, and I'm sure you've heard this: the difference between the fox and the hedgehog here, right?
Yep.
So many options is the fox, hedgehog is the one option, right? So I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. And in a company, is it important to have a blend of those types of thinkers, do you think?
Oh, it's critical. You have sometimes people that are overly focused and they only want to do this narrow-minded, narrow specific thing. And you get them to figure out how to expand their options and think more broadly. And there are some people that are just all over the place.
Right.
And they're just trying this and trying that, and they're doing a B-C job in every single one of them.
Right.
The key for me is, when it comes to a decision, it doesn't mean that you're doing all these different things. It simply means that you have the potential, if you want to do other things as second steps or third steps or fourth steps later on. But you need to remain focused on what you're doing. It doesn't mean you're doing a lot. It simply means that you are opening up adjacencies that could potentially exist later on. Whether you take advantage of them or not is less important than potentially having those to be able to take advantage of later.
Okay, so if you're a decision maker, one of the things you got to figure out is whether you're a hedgehog or a fox then, huh?
Exactly. Love it. The next
it's so challenging though. So let's talk about it, because this perhaps talks to another one of your biases. Because if I'm a hedgehog, I probably want to hang out with hedgehogs, because when I look at the fox, I think that fox is crazy. He's moving too fast and, doesn't know really what they're talking about. If I'm a fox, I'm looking at the hedgehog saying that guy's boring, or he's too conservative or too staid or something like that. As a leader, what do I do to overcome those types of biases or perspectives that I have?
Yeah, no, I think that, there's a famous way in which Abraham Lincoln approached leadership. And what Abraham Lincoln did after becoming president is he built his entire cabinet. He surrounded himself by people who were different than him, people who are his arch enemies. The book is called Team of Rivals. Mm-hmm. And it really speaks to the fact that he understood that when you surround yourself by people who are different from you, you are going to be making better decisions. So hedgehogs need to surround themselves with foxes, and foxes need to surround themselves by hedgehogs, and extroverts need to surround themselves with people who are more introverted, more thoughtful, more analysis-oriented. People who are more introverted, also need to surround themselves with the outside people. If you're an engineering leader, you need to surround yourself with people who are more aggressive potentially, and sales leaders. If you're more a sales, aggressive type personality, surround yourself with people who are more thoughtful, technical, engineering. So just find those people. That will create tension. But you know what? If you have your goals to be aligned, if your goal is create a great company and do it the right way, or whatever that goal happens to be, that will reduce a lot of the tension, even if your personalities happen to be different, and welcome that tension. Tension is healthy. You want that tension. Don't just, a lot of times people, what they do is they do the beer test. And the test for them is, do I want to have a beer with this person or not?
Yeah, right. Right.
Because people like hanging out with people like themselves. And it's a problem. It's a problem. You actually, you don't want to dislike, obviously, the people that you're working with. You want to like the people you're working with. But you can't have them make decisions in the exact same way as you. You're not going to succeed. It's very hard to succeed.
So here's another point of tension then that comes to mind as you're sharing this, is that I want people around me who are different, but where do I draw the line between differences in the way people think and differences in the way people behave? Because, one of the mantras of many businesses, well, we need to have people who are aligned values-wise. So how do you make that distinction there?
Okay, so there are certain values that you want to have as a leader that are sacrosanct. That's the bottom line. So, and Meetup, for example, lead with integrity is a value that is sacrosanct. That's not going to change. We want everyone to lead with integrity. Another one is trust and transparency. We need people who are going to be transparent leaders, who are going to share the good, bad, and the ugly, like I talked about earlier. And that's not something I want people to be different. So we have 6 values in our company that we documented, that we hire for. But outside of those 6, we want people to be different in as many different ways as possible, but actually to be fairly consistent in those sacrosanct areas.
Okay. Yeah. And so it's so important to define those values so that you can distinguish between the values and the thinking styles. That's very, very
Correct.
important.
And,
okay.
And an extrovert and introvert can have the exact same value. That's the bottom line. They can both care about integrity. They can both care about transparency. They can both care about focusing on impact. It's the style is where you want differences. The value is where you want to have consistency.
Excellent. Okay, so making decisions that increase the chance of you being lucky. That's one. What's another one of those key decisions that you share in your book?
Yeah. Okay. So it's the confidence equation, which is there's extremes among most leaders. On the one side, you have leaders who have inferiority complex, who have low self-esteem, who have imposter syndrome. Whatever you want to call it, you get that type of person. And the other side, like we talked about, you have people who are overly ego. Understanding where you are on that spectrum of confidence is critical to decision making, because if you are on one side of the confidence, overly confident, then that means is your behavior needs to compensate for that. Your behavior needs to be asking more questions, making sure it's clear to people that they should disagree. So for example, I happen to be a very confident person. So I end almost all of my opinions with saying, this is what I think. However, please feel free to disagree, because I would love to hear your perspective. So I compensate for my kind of directiveness at times with opening things up. On the other hand, if someone is lacking confidence or has imposter syndrome, that's another side where they need to figure out how they can use data or use other types of methodologies to instill more confidence in the things that they say as well. So I would say another item, aside from you could create your own luck, is figuring out how to be confident if you're not, and make sure you don't not overly confident if you ultimately are.
Interesting. And so if you do lack confidence, data is helpful for both for boosting that. And if you are overconfident, making sure that you're asking questions and giving people opportunities to disagree. It's interesting because when there's a very forceful leader in the room, they often do that, though. They often say, if you have any questions or disagreements, let me know. And everyone's kind of looking at him or her saying, yeah, right. Okay, fair enough. And the last time I did that, I got my head bit off. So is it important for a leader? How can a leader build the confidence in others that it's okay for them to disagree? And how can they get that ball rolling, so to speak?
So number one is if I'm in that situation and there's just like people staring back at me, I'll say, we're not going to leave the room until someone disagrees, because we need to make sure that we're making the right decision here. And even if you don't necessarily disagree yourself, pretend you're disagreeing and argue for that other side. Okay. And then allow someone, it gives people permission to be able to actually say it, even if they did disagree in the first place. That's number one. Number two is, man, if you bite someone's head off about disagreeing, like that's just the death knell. And you expect them to continue to disagree?
Yep.
You got to apologize publicly for that. And that just doesn't work. The next is find ways to engender disagreement in one-on-one dialogues. If people are just staring at you in a big group meeting, because people's propensity and comfort level with disagreeing in a one-on-one is going to be significantly higher. And if someone does disagree, oftentimes, you're not going to believe this, I will go with what the person said, even if I don't even agree with that decision, just simply to help to facilitate more just disagreement. If it's a huge decision, I'm not going to do it. But if it's a relatively minor decision, I'm going to just let the person have it. And I'm not even going to say, you have it, even though I disagree. I'm going to say, you know what? That's because that's passive aggressive. I'm going to say, that's a really great point. I had not thought of that. Let's do it your way. I'm aligned.
It's interesting because as we're talking about this, it makes me think about the tremendous levels of emotional self-control that a leader needs to exercise if they're going to be effective in the way that you're describing.
Oh my God. Yeah. EQ is way more important than IQ as part of, I think, leadership, generally speaking.
What are some ways that you have found that are helpful to you in controlling your emotions?
Breathe.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean by that?
It's true though, dude. It's true.
Take a breath.
Dude.
Pause. Good things will come. That's one.
Yep.
Because what happens if you don't, you get emotional, you get riled up. That's number one. Two is kind of recognize when you start acting in a certain way that you don't want to act. And just again, breathe, pause, stop. Someone has an anger issue and they start yelling about something. Find a way that's a trigger for you to just say like, wait, stop. This isn't how I want to be behaving. And just stop what you're doing. Pause. Let's take this up another time. So recognizing when you're not your best self.
Yeah.
And being able to pull yourself out of that when that happens, because everyone is not their best selves all throughout their day. And saying, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. Let's take this up later because I probably just woke up on the wrong side of the bed today.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. So let's think about this. You've made a decision, and let's say it wasn't a minor decision, but it wasn't a trapdoor decision, but it was a relatively major decision. And you've gotten data or feedback that it was the wrong decision. What now?
I love publicly admitting I was wrong, publicly, and saying to a group of people, I made a mistake. This was my call. I should not have done it. And unfortunately, we lost a month, we lost 2 months, we lost 3 months, whatever it is, because of my poor decision. And I want to just call that out to everyone. Because as a leader, that's what you want your people doing to you. So you've got to model that behavior. And the best thing that I could do is try to model behavior that I want others to, because then the next time that someone does that and makes a mistake, they'll model that behavior and they'll call it out. Because if they don't, then they're going to try to cover that mistake up. And they're going to not have or point fingers at someone else for making a mistake. And then that leads to more tension. The best thing you could do is model the behavior of owning up to a mistake. And then you go to the group and you say, hey, we made the mistake. What do you all think that we should do right now? Continue, pull back. What should we do? Is it too late? It's never too late, by the way. And that's what I tend to do. I tend to own up to it, say it publicly. And, you could think to yourself, oh, but then people won't have confidence in me. No, people know what's going on. Yep. People are not stupid.
Yep.
People know what's going on.
Yep.
All that will happen is that people will respect you a lot more for owning up to it. And you know what? When people are in an environment where there's accountability, that's what people want to hear. And that people own their mistakes, because heck, I'm making thousands of decisions, for God's sake. That means I'm making a whole lot of mistakes in those decisions too.
That's excellent. So as we're wrapping up here, and David, I really appreciate the insights you've shared. What are 3 concrete actions a leader can take to immediately get better at decision making? Okay.
Number 1, recognize your biases. Mm-hmm. We can talk about all the different biases now, but you can look these up on Google or whatever, or in the book. Yep. Understand whether you have strong recency bias or confirmation bias or sunk cost bias. Recognize your biases and then find a path towards having people help you and check you on those biases by declaring them to yourself and to others. That's number 1. Number 2 is make sure that your goals are crystal clear and aligned by a group. Meaning, too often, the reason for tension is because there's a lack of clarity around what the actual goals are, or there's clarity, but there's lack of incentives around that goal. So as a leader, if you make sure that there's goal clarity, aligned incentives around that goal, you're going to end up with just smarter decisions coming out of that, because people disagree because they don't have the right information, they have different incentives, etc. And then the third, I would say, to focus on is around really I think we talked about this, but I'm going to say something we talked about already.
Fine, it's fine.
Which is simply surround yourself by people that think differently than you, and be comfortable having tension, and understand that when there's tension, don't take it personal and don't make it personal. It's about the outcome. It's never about the person. And the quicker that you're able to not take things personally, or to take things out personally on someone else, because you know that their intentions are likely positive intentions for the company, the better that your relationship can be, and smarter decisions you could ultimately make.
Excellent. Excellent. David, this has been tremendously helpful. Decide and Conquer, 44 Decisions That Make or Break All Leaders. That's coming out soon. How can people learn more about that and get the book and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, first of all, to learn more about it, you can go to decideandconquerbook.com. So
excellent.
Our website. And obviously to buy the book, you go to Amazon, booksellers, anywhere you buy books, that book should be available. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Eric. And hopefully you will make the right decision and get the book as well.
That's tremendous. All the links will be in the show notes. David, I appreciate your generosity joining us here today on Construction Genius.
So much fun. Thank you.
Today's episode was brought to you by the Construction Conclave. If you as a construction leader would like to develop your skills and get involved in a community of like-minded construction professionals who are focused on building healthy teams, profitable projects, and long-term successful businesses, then the Construction Conclave is for you. It's a private, invitation-only group of construction leaders that are focused on developing their leadership skills. We do training every single month online that looks at how to become a better leader in a very practical, straightforward way. We also have other events that build community and camaraderie so that you can associate with others who are interested in developing their skills as leaders. If you'd like more information and to see if you qualify for participating in the conclave, feel free to reach out to me, eric@ericanderton.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and thanks again for listening.